Well, this is the all-new Jaecoo J7, and there's a couple of really interesting things that we're doing with this vehicle. One, if you look around at the scenery, looks a little bit similar to Australia, but we're actually in South Africa, which in itself is awesome, because South Africa is an awesome place to visit. I'll tell you why we're here in a minute. Two, Australian flag and Australia on the side of the car. And three, you'll see in some of the shots that it says sealed for the drive, and there's a piece of tape across the fuel filler lid here as well. The reason we're in South Africa, this is a key market for Jaecoo, which is part of the whole Chery conglomerate. And the Chinese manufacturer, might seem strange that a Chinese manufacturer would want to launch its car here, but they wanted to launch the car in a key right-hand drive market with the other right-hand drive global markets. Australia's one, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and of course, the United Kingdom. That's why we're here in South Africa. That's why it's got the Australian flag on the door, because the different markets are represented. We're doing a long-range economy challenge. We're not trying to drive stupidly to save fuel. What we're trying to do is just to drive normally to see how far we can get. We think we might get 1,200 kilometres on a tank of fuel. Let's find out if that's the case. This is the new Jaecoo J7. It's time to hit the road in South Africa.
The Jaecoo J7 plug-in hybrid features Jaecoo's new super hybrid system, which centres around a 5th generation dedicated 4-cylinder turbocharged hybrid engine with a capacity of 1.5 litres. There's a single front-mounted electric motor plus a dedicated hybrid transmission. All told, the system generates 255 kilowatts and 525 newton metres. You've probably read about the regular internal combustion powered J7, and while it's a decent offering, the plug-in hybrid's numbers blow it out of the water. Once the battery pack gets down to the 15% mark, the J7 switches over to self-charging mode, and even at speed on the highway for long stretches, the claimed range was suggesting 1,100 kilometres was possible. The system likes to keep the battery charged to around the 20% mark in self-charging mode, and in that state, both the petrol engine and e-motor constantly discharge and recharge the battery as you drive.
Well, as you'd expect on a drive like this, we've spent precisely no time in the second row. So let's focus on the front row here, because we've been driving for almost all of it, passenger seat as well, obviously. We'll take a closer look at second row and luggage space when we get the vehicle in Australia. Although in the luggage space, you can fit 2 large suitcases underneath the retractable luggage cover. So it's got plenty of room back there. I think the key here for this vehicle is the build quality and the fit and finish. Really clever driver's display that works well. The infotainment screen is fantastic. It's been a little bit laggy in terms of response, so they might need to do an update to that just to get it working a little more snappily. But the actual display itself, the way it works with Android Auto, which we've tested, and Apple CarPlay on this trip, we've done both. It's worked pretty well. It's been faultless for us, no issues. Wireless charging has worked well for us as well. And the fit and finish, choice of materials, all of the trim, that sort of stuff is really good. You've got heated and cooled seats. They're comfortable. Visibility's good. We've obviously done a lot of long driving. We did 500 and something kilometres on day one. So we've spent a long time in the car, both as passenger and driving. Very comfortable in here. And as I said, it's always interesting to drive a vehicle in a different market to our own. So we're looking forward to driving this on the road in Australia. But here at launch, this has been particularly impressive, particularly comfortable, and also particularly efficient, which we'll explain in a minute. Most interesting thing I think about driving this vehicle here in South Africa is that a lot of these road surfaces are very similar to what you would get in rural Australia, if not, to be fair to the South Africans, a little better. They have a particularly good road network, which some of you might find surprising. More on that in a second. 1.5 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine paired with an electric motor and a just beneath 20 kilowatt hour battery pack, which gives you all of the hybrid trickery that you would expect. Plug-in hybrid, it works as a series hybrid as well, and it works in the real world. I guess that's the point. This is at the tail end now of our drive experience, and we're going to cover 1,200 kilometres on a tank of fuel. Now, that was the objective of the drive to start with, but the fact that we've done it in the real world is quite impressive, because to be able to do that in a petrol engined vehicle, especially a small petrol engine, used to be the realm of really efficient European diesel engines. So to be able to do it with a small petrol engine, and one that can run as an electric vehicle as well, is quite impressive. Back to that ride quality point, I think it's worth mentioning that we haven't checked the tyre pressures on this car, so this has been a bit of a global challenge. There's only 2 of us from Australia. We're sharing this one car. We've been driving normally. Some of our counterparts, let's just say they haven't, and we'll leave it at that. We've been driving normally in that we get in the car, we drive to the speed limit, we don't try to be stupidly efficient, we drive it the way that you would drive it in the real world, but we don't know if the tyre pressures are a little bit higher than they might otherwise be to gain some efficiency. So we haven't checked them, and it's worth mentioning that the ride does feel a little bit firm. It's not uncomfortable. It's probably what you'd expect out of, say, a European vehicle on Australian roads. So it's not uncomfortable. When we do some testing locally, we'll check the tyre pressures and make sure they're to the placard, because maybe they might be a little bit lower. Importantly, these cars do have quality tyres. We've seen a mixture of Michelins. I think we've seen some Yokohama tyres. Kumos are listed on the spec sheet. So we've seen a mixture of quality tyres on these test vehicles. They're definitely not skimping and putting cheap tyres on them. It's worth mentioning as well that this is front-wheel drive. We've been looking at this throughout the drive, wondering why you wouldn't make it all-wheel drive, because you've got a fairly hefty slab of power on offer, 250 kilowatts, give or take. And then you've got a chunky torque rating as well, more than 500 Newton meters. So if you absolutely nail the throttle, especially coming out of a corner, you're going to notice some torque steer. And that's one of the negatives. There is a bit of torque steer because it's all going to the front wheels. And I think at that power and torque rating, you're starting to get to a point where you probably do want the vehicle to be all-wheel drive, especially if you're on wet roads the way we are now. That's one of the negatives that we think Jaecoo should look at. One of the other ones is the steering. It's not disconcerting when you're on the move. It doesn't do anything weird when you're on the move, but when you turn into a corner and the steering wheel would normally start to unwind the lock itself, this one doesn't do it as quickly as you might think. Now, that could just be a wheel alignment issue. It could be something to do with the way the system's been set up. I don't know, but that's something we'd probably like Jaecoo to have a look at when the vehicle gets to Australia. Aside from those 2 points though, everything else about the drive has been particularly inoffensive. It's pretty quiet, it's pretty insulated, it's pretty comfortable. It's a pleasant cabin to be in when you're on a long drive. And as I said earlier in the video, we have done some long driving. We did 500 and something kilometers on day one. And that's more than enough time to find out if a car is uncomfortable, noisy, and not that enjoyable to drive. So I think Australians are starting to consider plug-in hybrids as an option. I think they got a bad rap initially. I think part of that was Australian motoring journalists just piling in and saying they weren't internal combustion and they weren't electric and they were somewhere in the middle and hedging your bets. But when you stop and think about it, as you've heard me describe multiple times before, if you've got a very set driving regimen that you do, if Monday to Friday you do 30 or 40 Ks each way to work or less, and you do that regularly every week, you're going to do it in a vehicle like this without using any fuel at all. And then you've got a regular engine on board to go for longer road trips on the weekend if that's what you do. So I think Australians are starting to consider plug-in hybrids as an option. And in the real world, in conditions that are pretty similar to what you would find in rural Australia, the J7 has proven to be pretty impressive. Well, that's it, the new Jaecoo J7 plug-in hybrid. First of all, let us know what you think of the styling in the comments section below. It's always interesting to drive a car in another market because the impact that this has on the street here in South Africa is going to be very different to how Australians receive it. I think it looks pretty good. I think the styling is pretty good. Let us know what you think in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like if you've enjoyed the video. Click on subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest video content, and the full review of the Jaecoo J7 plug-in hybrid is over at Drive.com.au.